Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Quigley on Divorce, a behind-the-scenes look. I'm pleased to introduce to you today Tiffany Irving. Tiffany is a wealth advisor at BMO Private Banking, and I've known Tiffany for quite some time. And so, as part of our ongoing financial series, today we're going to talk about kind of in a narrow demographic, and it's not really meant to be by way of exclusion to anyone, any of the viewers or listeners, but it's just really kind of a unique situation that we encounter in divorce, which is dealing with women primarily that may have been in more of a traditional kind of marriage setting where they have been married a long time, maybe they've been homemakers and raised the children and those kinds of things before, went their career, and now find themselves in a divorce, maybe not having a level of understanding of finances in terms of what maintenance means and what assets means. So getting into that as sort of a background, first of all, welcome and thank you for coming in today, Tiffany.
Thank you for having me.
So, Tiffany, first of all, why don't you just tell the viewers and listeners just a little bit about who you are, your experience, your background, what you do on a daily basis?
Sure, thank you. So I'm a private wealth advisor with BMO Private Bank. I've got about 20 years in wealth management here in Chicago, so worked with numerous clients, but my passion, as we've discussed before, is women in wealth management and empowering other women in similar roles to myself, but making sure we know and understand our finances and are prepared to take over if we're not doing them today, to be prepared when that time comes.
So when you say a wealth advisor, I assume it's a very broad term in terms of what you bring to advising your clients. It's not just taking their money and investing it, it's much broader than that.
Much broader. So breaking it down a little bit, I really believe and grew up in a world where you start with the holistic planning. So you look big picture and you can't just look at each piece in a vacuum. So we're talking both the private banking, which is deposits and credit and those things, in addition to financial planning, which we've all heard that term, but what does that mean? And that's kind of an overview of all the pieces of the puzzle, if you will, the insurance, risk management for the family, and the investment piece, of course, is a big component of that, but you can't really do the investment side until you understand what the client's goals and objectives are, what you're trying to accomplish. And so that's really how we view the world. It's important for us to get to know and understand what you're trying to accomplish first, and then build a program and a plan to get you there.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's take all of that breadth of experience you have in terms of wealth advising, and let's kind of hone in on a very common sort of hypothetical that we encounter in divorce, which is, let's say I've got a couple they're going through a divorce. It's not finalized yet. They're going through a divorce, call it a 20-year marriage, put the parties mid-40s maybe, and you've got a situation where husband went out and maybe he's making $500,000 a year, and the wife in the marriage had got a college degree, but once the first child was born, stopped working and has been home raising 3 kids, such that there's still maybe a couple that are home that are still minors, maybe a third child that's gone off and is in college now. So in the context of even before that divorce is finalized, if you had the opportunity to get involved with the wife's spouse in that particular divorce, are you able to afford any kind of advisory services even before the divorce is finalized?
Absolutely, because I think planning is the first step. So I would take a step further and say always be prepared, and whether it's divorce, inheritance, an illness, incapacitation, those are all likely events even before death. So the couples that we work with, I am always trying to make sure that both spouses are at our meetings, or at least at one of our annual meetings per year, because we want to make sure that everyone understands what that full financial picture looks like in advance of a situation, whether it's divorce or something else for that matter, because that's an emotional time. Mm-hmm. So if you can get a better understanding of your full financial picture, what are your assets, how are they titled, where are they held, who do you call? These are a lot of things, to your point, that sometimes come up near the end of a divorce or post-divorce, and so you're trying to pull a lot of things together all at one time. So it's helpful if, right, you're armed with information in advance. Of course, we don't go into it thinking that divorce will occur, but just make sure you know and understand and are a part of those conversations. And that's even true in my own family. I'm the breadwinner and my husband stays home. So we're sort of that non-traditional family in reverse, if you will. But I'm always pushing him to be a part of those conversations with me. And he doesn't enjoy it and he doesn't like it and he hates finances, right? But I think that's kind of, if we could back up, I would say, be aware, know what you have and where it's located. So
that's even the context of, that's just really good general advice to all the viewers and listeners, that in a marriage, regardless of what your role is in that marriage, if you're raising the kids and getting them back and forth to soccer and basketball and all those great things and musicals and all that fun stuff, you still want to be informed. You want to be educated, at least understanding, like you said, what do we have? What are we paying for? Because I oftentimes get people, they'll come in and they'll say, I have no idea what we have. I have no idea. They literally do not know, not even the amount of their investments, but sometimes they don't even know, do you have retirement money? Oh, I think my husband maybe has a retirement plan. Do you have any cash investments or stocks? I don't know. Usually real estate, they can kind of figure that out. But that's really great advice, even before getting into a situation. Just in a happy, healthy marriage, make sure that you understand your finances.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So in the context where someone hasn't gotten that advice in advance, and hopefully there are people that are watching and listening and they're saying, I think I got a good marriage, and they say, you know what?
But I don't know those things.
I don't quite know. And by the way, even in I'll sort of diverge, but pre-divorce almost, when you start talking about knowing what your, maybe your assets and liabilities are, would it also be important just to understand basic banking? Like, what bills do we pay? So if there's a spouse in a marriage that isn't the one paying the bills, is it on auto pay? What do we pay for our mortgage? What company is our mortgage? So just basic bill paying, would that also be something where you would encourage people to understand that aspect of it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that piece of it, you might not be the one doing it monthly to your point, but know where it is, know the passwords, know how to get in. I think that's information that is critical to be shared.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, taking that into the context of someone then coming to see me in a divorce, it's always so much more helpful to us if we know, okay, we've got a credit card here, we got a credit card there, we bank here, we've got the investments here, so that if we're having a hard time getting the information, we know the institutions to subpoena and we can get that information. So let's kind of then take that next step. We're in the process of a divorce and someone hadn't heard the message from you or hadn't had the benefit of talking with you in advance, and now they find themselves somewhat disadvantaged. Like you said, it's a very emotional time. They're, not even sure what the law provides or what it really means, but then all of a sudden in the process, their lawyer's saying, well, you're going to get this for maintenance, you're going to get this for child support, and half the assets, and they have no idea what that means. Are you able to then, in the process, be able to assist people to say, okay, let's take a look at what your lawyer's telling you the numbers mean, and let's start formulating a plan so that maybe we can negotiate a different deal. Maybe we get more assets, or we, exchange assets for maintenance or something along those lines. What can you do while the process is still pending?
Absolutely. So I think when you start that, as I alluded to earlier, the financial planning process, and outline, to your point, what those assets are, what income you might be receiving, if you have to go back to work, what that might look like, if there's a gap you need to fill, right? Identifying what your goals are now, because that might have changed, but it's whether it's college funding, can I maintain my lifestyle as I was used to living it? We still want to take X amount of trips per year, those things, right? So build out a plan to see, first of all, if that's possible. If that's not possible, what does it look like? As I mentioned, how do we fill that gap? But I think that plan also, to your point, in the midst of a divorce, we've seen it be helpful when you're looking at that division of assets, and you can look at what the tax impact is, the future growth potential of certain assets. I think sometimes on either side, you think, well, I just am really attached to it, and I want the house, and my spouse is going to take this. But what does that really look like longer term for you? That might not be the right answer. So I think that planning is really, really critical.
So you mentioned in that the house, and I want to kind of just nail down on that point, because that's really a common issue that we encounter, in that oftentimes people are very, and rightfully so, attached to their homes. It's where they raise their children. It's where they've had celebrations and holidays and all these various events. And some people have been very invested in designing it, and maybe some people built it. So oftentimes we get people, they want to desperately keep the house, but there's a cost to keeping the house. And so is that something where you're able to sit with someone and say, listen, if you got divorced and you have this amount of money coming in, for you to be able to maintain the house, which, by the way, it's not just a mortgage, there's taxes, there's the windows need to be replaced, and I got the landscaping guys every week coming through. So are you able to kind of sit through and really quantify for them, just on like one singular issue, the house? Like, for you to keep the house, you'd have to spend X number of dollars per month just to keep the house.
Absolutely. It's a deep dive into those cash flows.
Okay. Yeah. So that to me is really, that's so interesting, because what I've found is, if there's another voice kind of echoing the same concern, and again, my job is to tell you, here's what the law provides, here's what we can get you. I oftentimes make recommendations, and again, I'll send people your way to say, figure out if you can figure it out financially, but you might be better off downsizing. That's a real hard pill for people to swallow.
It's a very difficult pill to swallow.
So here's an interesting.
I would say realistic.
Yeah.
It helps for them to realistically take a step back and think what will work.
And that's really what your modeling is really designed to do, right? Because
yes.
I think you mentioned too, that said, listen, if you want to keep this house and you want to take vacations, you mentioned all these things that you've done during the marriage, and you're going to get X number of dollars for support and maintenance, you might have to actually go back to work and find a job that pays you, $30,000, $40,000 a year to be able to live comfortably, where you're not depleting the assets that you're getting.
Yeah.
So,
and depending on your scenario earlier, right, we were talking 40, 50 years old, you still have a pretty long lifespan.
Yeah.
Pretty long lifespan.
Yeah. And when you project out the models, do you take into consideration someone's age?
Absolutely. Yep. Their age. We talk about investments, and to your point earlier, if they we do a lot of education on the investment and financial planning side, because it's critical for them to understand what their assets are doing for them and how that works, what the taxation on that will be. So trying to build out a comfort level with them on the types of investing they are doing, right, with their additional assets. But to your point, I like that. How much can I pull from the portfolio to supplement my needs on an annual basis without depleting the portfolio? Those are all kind of built into those conversations we have about goals and what they're really trying to accomplish.
And I like what you said before, reality. That's a really hard concept. And candidly, I struggle with clients from time to time, because my job is to remain objective, and to, like I said, it really, in many cases, is a dollars and cents transaction. They're struggling in so many other ways, and they're trying to, battle through the emotional side of it. And you're the one saying, I get it, but too bad. This is what you're going to get. So it's really, I think, helping them to understand reality in a positive way, maybe. Yeah, because like you said, empowerment, and I think it's really empowering. And what we've seen too is, and again, this isn't just, I'm always trying to dance and not be sexist in this thing, but it's just really, it is still very much a truism in our world, where you still have probably a greater percentage of traditional marriages where the wife stays home, as opposed to your situation where the husband stays home. And so in those situations, they come out, and it's really trying to empower them, build them up, give them some sense of hope. And what I think is the financial independence is something that, with someone like you helping them along the way, I think just learning to be able to say, you know what, it's my money, I'm paying my bills, I'm investing, I'm doing okay. That can be very empowering in and of itself.
Absolutely. Often we're taking a step back, and to your point, going back over how do I budget? What does that look like monthly? How do I see more and more marriages where the divorce is coming later? So in cases where we're trying to teach people how to use technology, how to set up auto payments, how to get access on their iPads and their phones to their finances and the security around that. But for me, that's the fun part.
I should probably come see you because I could use some help.
That's the education is the fun part. And I would say for any advisor, right, they need to find someone they can trust to have these conversations with. So finding a person where you can be 100% honest with, these are my goals, or being able to come sit at the table and say, I haven't paid bills in 20 years. I don't know how to do that. I think it's very hard for people to say, because it's just not a role they've been playing, and that's okay.
And that is a great point, because we get the same thing. Sometimes I'll sit with a client and they may be almost embarrassed. They say, I'm ashamed to say I honestly don't. And again, I try to reassure our clients that you're not alone. There are a lot of people, and it's not like you aren't doing anything in a marriage. If you're raising kids, if you're, keeping a household, if you're supporting a spouse in their career, there's a lot that goes into that. It's a team. So there's nothing to be ashamed of, but I think starting at a grassroots level and sort of building that knowledge really is important.
Absolutely.
So when you talk about budget and modeling, it's really interesting to me because we've ran into some problems where it's almost, I'm trying to be diplomatic with this, but it almost created a problem in a couple situations, because what happened in certain circumstances is, without our sort of working the client through the process, someone says, hey, you should go talk to a wealth advisor. And they go to someone other than you, and so that probably isn't the smartest thing to do in the first place. But
definitely call me.
Definitely. But what happens is they go off and they sit with the wealth advisor, and the wealth advisor says, well, how much is your mortgage? How much do you spend on vacations? And they go through all these things in terms of how they spent during the marriage. And then the wealth advisor comes back and says, great, you need $20,000 a month. And then the client comes back and says, I need $20,000 a month. And we say, that's great, but there's formulas in Illinois that say, calculates support, calculates maintenance. And so let's say the formulas spit out that you're going to get $12,000 a month. Then it's very difficult for me, because it's almost like I'm competing with the wealth advisor that gave them some sort of belief that that's what they're entitled to, when all they're really doing is just sort of spitting back numbers, right, based on what they were told. Mm-hmm. So that's something where I think just kind of making sure the viewers and listeners understand, we have to work in synergy with one another in terms of expectations, because it really starts with what you're going to be entitled to. So where I think it makes sense in terms of bringing you in as a wealth advisor is, once we have a sense of where we're going, we've done the discovery, we have somewhat of a sense of the assets, we have a sense of the income, which we then can calculate support and maintenance. Then we can go and say, talk to Tiffany, sit down, and off of these numbers, see what's realistic. So
I think you're hitting on collaboration.
Absolutely.
Is absolutely important. With all your advisors, your accountant should be in those conversations, sharing kind of tax information as needed.
You mentioned estate planning before.
Estate planning people, for sure, because I'm sure you tell your clients, but that's one of the critical components of checking off your to-do list going through a divorce, right? Changing beneficiary designations, making sure your wills and your trusts are all updated. And so that's part of what we do in the overall planning. But we don't do all of that in-house, right? Sure. We pull in the other advisors, and if you don't have one, can recommend other advisors for each of those things. But absolutely, it's got to be collaboration amongst your advisors as well.
And that's part of your educational process for individuals coming out of divorce, is they may not have ever thought about needing their own accountant.
Right.
The other spouse maybe always took care of the taxes. They have an accountant. They always, here's the tax return, sign there.
Sign here. Mm-hmm.
And so understanding working with an accountant and estate planning, because now again, if you come out of a divorce and you have your own wealth, you have your own income, you have children, you have other beneficiaries. What do you want to do? And so even changing plans, changing beneficiaries, all stuff that is very important. So that's some of the stuff you would walk someone through when they come in and sit down with you after divorce.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So aside from the kind of budgeting and income side of things, as is usually the case in a divorce, there's a property settlement. Hopefully. Hopefully that hasn't been paid out to all the lawyers because of a bad fight. But how do you treat, and let's take that hypothetical we had before. So, there's $500,000 of income off of that. There's going to be some child support and maintenance paid. But let's say it's a $2 million estate, and the spouse that's coming to see you has $1 million of assets. Let's say a third of that is in retirement form. A third of it is cash, and maybe a third of it is in real estate that, maybe the individual is going to hang on to, maybe going to sell. What kind of, what do you do with the asset side? Is it as simple as saying, listen, give me your money and I'm going to invest it in these funds or these stocks? Or how do you manage a plan around the assets?
Right. So that's, I think, when you look at the whole plan, kind of how do the pieces fall together. So if there are liquid assets that are investable and that makes sense, what does that look like? And so that's going to be a broader conversation based on, the income needs. Are we building an income-based portfolio because we need some additional monthly cash off of it? Are we really investing for growth? You don't need to tap these assets longer term. What are you doing within the retirement assets if you have those, and how to complement what's happening there? So I would say each situation, every client situation is going to be a little unique in that regard, but you have to take a look at the big picture. So it would be too presumptuous to say, I'm just going to take this, whatever it is, $200,000 and put you all in stocks. So that's not
right. Break down, because you said two things within that. Break down where you said, are we investing for income purposes versus growth?
Mm-hmm.
To somebody who might be listening and say, well, what do you mean by that? Break down those components, and where would you look to apply those various situations?
So within a portfolio, there are different assets that you can invest in. Some that are geared towards, when I say growth, I mean just the asset itself hopefully will be invested in such a manner to see that grow over time. So let's just take Apple stock, for instance. You hope that that's going to continue to grow over time, and you're not looking to sell at any particular moment or take dividends. You're going to reinvest as you will. You just want to see that kind of something you're not going to tap into. When I say investment oriented, although there are dividends on equities, it may be we need a short-term cash alternative, whether it's bonds, right? It kind of depends on what's going on economically at the time and what we're recommending there. But if we really need to pull some level of return out of the portfolio, what does that look like? And how do we generate that for you? So I think
meaning the asset itself, we need to pull maybe even monthly income, because to supplement, like we said before, if I've kept a house,
right,
and I still need a little money to make ends meet, can we use that $1 million or whatever portion of it's invested to actually generate additional income?
A portion that might help, right, meet some of those cash needs in that. Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I mean, I again, maybe I'm stating the obvious, but some people might not understand the concept. The last thing we want to do is find yourself in a situation where if you're 45 at the end of your divorce and your children are going to emancipate at some point, so you're not going to get child support, maybe you've got a stream of maintenance, but if I'm using that $1 million I got to supplement and supplement and supplement, I don't want to exhaust the principal, meaning the original $1 million, so that now I'm 60, I've got nothing, right?
Yeah. So those are the projections we try to put in the plan and look forward looking. So we're not just looking 12, 24, 36 months. We kind of build ours out, over a lifespan.
And does it change if the client that comes from me in a divorce to you in a wealth advisory capacity, if she's 45, 55, 65, and does the age
I mean, it does, because your projected life expectancy is going to shrink depending on how old you are at the time. So that's a factor, but not the only factor, right? It's going to depend on what are the other assets that you're working with. But also, again, what are your goals? So for some individuals, it will be, I want to spend my last dollar on my last day, and that's okay. Others want to leave a legacy to children. Others want to leave, they have philanthropic goals. So it's also identifying what that looks like long term for families.
And when you identify those things with your client, does that dovetail kind of into a conversation with your estate planning or the estate planning lawyer, so that those goals are met with a proper legal plan to effectuate, like you said, maybe philanthropic, donations?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's a collaboration there, but then also that is going to also affect how we want to invest those assets and what that, without going into an investment podcast here, but that what we call asset allocation, whether that's going to be in stocks or bonds or other investable assets. So it kind of helps us build that portfolio.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to touch on at least one more topic, and that's in the issue of credit. So oftentimes, again, we see this where credit card has only been in one of the spouse's names. Car notes, maybe we never had car notes because they just get paid in cash, or they're always, say, for example, in this hypothetical, the husband's just buying the cars in his name. Maybe there's a mortgage in that individual's name, so there's some credit built. But how important is credit for an individual coming out of divorce in terms of being able to buy their own car, being able to buy a house at some point, maybe downsize, but still having to get a mortgage?
That's very important. So just like when kids are kind of going off to college and we're educating them on how to start building their credit so they're ready to buy a home, I think that the same situation applies here. So whether it's one credit card in your name, whether it's, a mortgage in both names, I mean, you want to have those conversations with your advisors throughout the marriage anyway to make sure things are titled appropriately. But I think that's going to be a critical component also. It will be difficult, I would say, if you have no credit history and then suddenly you have to sell and downsize, or you need credit for some reason.
Yeah.
Your score just might not be where you want it to be.
Are you able to work with clients and even helping them just to get a basic credit card so they can start establishing some form of credit payments?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's these things, under a hypothetical, we're talking about a 45-year-old individual. I think most viewers and listeners would assume, of course, everybody's got a credit card, everybody's, got their credit rating, but you wouldn't be surprised. But I think
but maybe the viewers are surprised.
Yeah, but it's a very real issue, and so I think it's going back to what we were saying earlier. Nothing to be ashamed of, but it's something that when you sit down and you started this conversation by talking about a holistic plan, that may seem relatively minor, but it's very important, and it has to be something that you start building, because if that individual comes out of a divorce, and maybe they did sell the house, the beloved house that they wanted to stay in, they listened to me, they listened to you, and said just economically it doesn't make sense. So they sell that, and they've gotten part of their cash from that, and now they're saying, boy, I'd like to buy another house. And so you work with them on their credit, but also then on whether or not to get a mortgage, take a mortgage, and getting them to the position where they could actually be able to get a mortgage in their name and maybe buy something on their own. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So
there's a lot of pieces. That's why I describe it as it's a very big puzzle with a lot of different pieces. Yeah. And so we try to help put them all together.
Yeah. So tell me just, and we'll kind of finish up with someone is referred to you. You don't know anything about it. What is it that if you sit down, are they filling out forms? Do you have a sit down with them? What is it? How do you get to the point where you're able to develop a plan for someone who comes out of a divorce?
Absolutely. Well, I think first we sit down, not with microphones, but a conversation similar to this, because like I said, in order to kind of build that plan, we have to understand what you're trying to accomplish. So I think it starts with getting to know one another, building a level of trust in each other, because you're asking someone to share all of their personal financial information with you. The unfortunate next step, I think, is the data gathering, which is time consuming, right? Getting years of statements, prior year's tax returns, if the divorce is finalized, what does that settlement look like, all of the pieces we would need to start a plan. But we work through that. We're absolutely do not fill out forms. A lot of it's electronic these days. But we're meeting with more and more clients at their homes. We're happy to do it either way, whatever's most convenient. But I think that's probably the biggest challenge in the beginning is the data gathering. And we try to work through that as much as possible because often people are either working or they have children they're dealing with, right? So trying to make it as easy as possible. But once we have that information and can build it out, like once you have that plan, we can build very different things. That if I wanted, looking at different house scenarios, right? This one's $1 million, this one's $1.5 million. What does that do to me longer term? When do I start to run out of money? If my kid wants to go to private school or state school, what does that do to our finances longer term? So you can build in different scenarios too as people start to think about what those longer term goals are, and that way we can see how it's going to affect them financially. It's a very good tool for helping them make financial decisions going forward.
Interesting. It sounds eerily like us when we first meet. I mean, it's really the same thing. It's you're building trust.
Yeah.
You're information gathering, and then once you have the trust and the information gathering, it's trying to process a plan.
Right.
And I don't want to overlook this because you mentioned something about private school. Let's say you worked with someone that came to you and they had really young children. Do you ever work with clients in terms of establishing 529 plans or educational plans, anything like that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what's and how does operationally what's advantages are to doing that, and how does it work?
Sure, it depends. Depending on where they come from. Sometimes it's the grandparents who are establishing that. We look at different tax planning reasons to sometimes have grandparents do it, pre-funding a portion of it. If you live in Illinois, right, there are some tax benefits if you use the Illinois plan. So we don't look at one particular 529. We're trying to solve for what you're trying to accomplish, but what plan makes the most sense, what's cost effective, looking at the tax side of things. So kind of put all of that in there. And again, depending on your resources, how much do we need to save each year in those plans, and whether or not you want to go beyond 4 years, if your kid's going to be on the 5-year plan, if you want to pay for if you want to pay for master's programs, or if you're going to med school, or all those things. So you kind of have to build that in.
Interesting.
It's unique. It's a very interesting tool. And talking about if we've had situations where one child maybe isn't going to school right away, or how you can transfer to other beneficiaries if you need to. So yeah.
And so I think when I step back from all this a little bit, it sounds like and I hadn't thought about this when we talked about us kind of getting together.
Yeah.
Your advice to people before you get into the situation, I thought was really, really helpful, because to the extent you can start an individual's educational process before they're in this kind of a situation, they're going to be so much further ahead of the game. Because then when I talk with an individual, they come to me, if they have that sense of understanding what our financial plan was in the marriage, I understand where the assets are, I understand a little bit about the income, it makes it so much easier for us to even be able to work with them, and I'm sure the same with you. Aside from that as a really good piece of advice for anybody in a marriage, anybody just in general, right? Even if you're not even married, you should understand, because you represent people who are not, right? Everybody needs a wealth advisor, particularly Tiffany. But is there anything that you would say, just, circling back to your original premise of really empowerment for women, is there any messages you'd want to deliver, beyond what, we talked about in terms of learning about your finances in the marriage or in your relationship, just generally to women in the capacity that you serve?
Yeah, I think that, as we mentioned, the planning early, of course, is important. If you haven't, it doesn't mean it's too late. It's never too late. But I think it's just around financial independence and what you really want to accomplish long term. How am I going to get from A to B? What does that look like? I think, to your point, it's very powerful. It's a very powerful tool. It's important to understand and to know, not only for you, but If you have children, your next generation, and if not children, that's nieces, nephews, siblings. I think just having the conversation, I think more people are talking about finances with their friends and their families more so than ever before. And it's important to share your experiences, refer advisors, of course, but I think that having that sort of a trusted relationship is going to be really important long term.
I think it's really interesting because, like you said, the conversation is out there. And I think the more people, just even if they're listening, and that's what I hope people listen and watch these kind of podcasts, because it takes the stigma off of maybe having a conversation with someone saying, I don't really know anything about my financial situation. And so maybe they can start to do that. And I would add to that, what we talk to clients about too, they come see us, they don't know anything. I say, you know what? When you go home, take a picture of an envelope. At least let's find out what financial institutions mail is coming through. Try to figure things out. The tax return that your spouse gave to you, take a look at it. Let's get a copy of that. Let's make sure you understand that. So there's a lot to learn. And it took a lifetime for you and all of this being your career to really know it at the level of depth you do. But there's a lot of things people can do at a baseline level to really get ahead of the game.
Right. And we do a lot of education with the next generation. Big part of what we do too. So I have that conversation with you, young children. I have young children, like how to get them ready. I'm not sure why they're not teaching us in schools yet, but
don't get me started on that conversation. There's a lot of things.
But I think it's critical. It's a critical life skill. Right? It's really important.
And I think too, when you said financial independence, we've talked about that. I believe that people can have financial independence in a marriage and still have joint accounts and joint assets and joint goals in terms of what they're doing. But financial independence, in my mind, is more with one's ability to understand for him or herself their financial picture, how we use money, how money works.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask one last question.
Sure.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but
are.
I will a little bit because people want to know. I mean, I'm a divorce lawyer in Illinois. I don't have a choice. If you come to me, I charge you by the hour. Everything we do in this firm, we track, from the paralegals to the associate attorneys and the different hourly rates based on experience. But that's how we get compensated as divorce lawyers.
Yep.
How does a wealth advisor, if somebody really needs your services, and we have this hypothetical, they come to you, do they write you a check per the hour, or how do you get paid?
Yeah, I would say it's a good question to ask. So if you're interviewing advisors, ask how they get paid. These are important. Every place is a little different. Some do charge just for the plan itself. We don't charge for a financial plan. We charge based on assets under management. So it's kind of a monthly look at what the investment account looks like. So if markets are up and down. So we charge a percentage on the investable assets. The plan, we think we can't invest your assets without building a plan. So we've built that into our fee schedule. There's no separate charge for that.
Got it. So if someone just came out of a divorce though and they wanted to sit down with you just to meet you, to get an understanding of what services you offer, would they be charged for that?
No.
Okay, terrific. Well, then to that point,
so call me.
Yes, tell the viewers and listeners if they wanted to get in touch with Tiffany Irving, which I highly, highly recommend. How would they get in touch with your phone number, website, and what's easier?
Sure. Yeah. Let me just give you a phone number. It's hard to do email on a podcast, I guess, but it's 312-461-8397.
Say it again.
312-461-8397. I'm based here out of our BMO Chicago office, but we travel. We come to see clients everywhere. So don't feel like you need to find a way into Chicago to find me. I'll come to you.
Last question. And are you, and thank you for that, are you able to, let's say you have a person that's getting divorced here, but maybe they don't have any minor children. They said, I want to retire down to Florida. Can you still be a wealth advisor for that individual if they move down to Florida?
Absolutely. I would say half my client base is not here in Chicago.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, listen, first of all, thank you again for taking your time and coming in and to help just give a little bit of information and knowledge. The financial aspects of a divorce are very nuanced. And having the right people to give guidance and advice is super, super important and really valuable to us as divorce lawyers. So, Tiffany Irving, thank you again for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
Take care.